Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. We're back at it here. We've got a couple more weeks now until we're going to gear back up, and then we can gear back down for Christmas. But it's going to be quite a next 2 weeks here with the election still in full swing. If Biden pulls this thing out, I just want to share this here. Are you ready for 4 more years of this? This is a reporter at Bloomberg News. George H.W. Bush was known for his socks. Maybe Biden will be too. Today he wore dark blue socks adorned with lighter blue dogs. Yes, there's plenty more substantive things to tweet about, but we can have some fun sometimes too. I've seen dozens of headlines like this already. The Daily Beast ran a story about a pet psychic and how Biden's dogs are excited to live in the White House and how their master is going to make a great president. 4 years of it. Listen, if you need the will to fight for Trump's victory illegally in these next 2 weeks here, if you need that extra urge, it's so you don't have to suffer through 4 more years of those headlines. Coming up in the next segment, we're going to talk about Trump's latest legal battles. In Pennsylvania, he had a win in a lower court, a loss in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and that's going to go to the federal Supreme Court next. So we'll talk about that coming up in the next segment. But before we get to that, I want to celebrate here. All right, first day back after Thanksgiving. Let's start off with a major victory here. Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn versus Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, released by the Supreme Court it was like late at night the day before Thanksgiving. And what a wonderful, beautiful thing it was. This is a good sign of what's to come for the Supreme Court for many, many years. Thank you, President Trump. People will say, was it worth it? Was it worth having Trump in office for 4 years just to get your 3 justices? Yep. So here's the story. Cuomo passed a executive order that said if an area is deemed a hotspot red zone, then all churches, mosques, and synagogues must limit capacity to 10 people max. That's it. No matter how big the building is, 10 people at one time, that's it. Out of that red zone, there's an orange circle, and then you can have 25 people inside your church, and then after that is a yellow circle, and you can have 50% of the building's capacity. So the Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn and 2 Orthodox Jewish synagogues sued and went to the Supreme Court, and 5-4. Now there's a choice you can make here. You can either say, what, that's it, and get upset by it, or you can take the W, baby. 5-4. The Supreme Court ruled, no, Cuomo. There's this pesky thing called the First Amendment. You can't just say, only 10 people can go to church, that's it. Now, think about this for a minute before we go into the detail. If Trump wasn't president, if Hillary Clinton won in 2016, and even if the Republicans didn't have the cojones to put Amy Barrett in the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court would have ruled the other way. And the Supreme Court we were one vote away from the Supreme Court saying, yeah, sure, that's no problem. No problem. The governor can say, yeah, no one can go to church because I said so. That's fine. That's how close this was. That's the current state of your country. This is our America right now. That's the state of the Constitution. One vote away from a pandemic with a 99.99% survival rate. The government using that as justification to shut down all religious services, but keeping open strip clubs. So again, that's true. It's only one vote away, but I'm going to celebrate the W nonetheless. So let's go over a couple of the points of the Supreme Court ruling. We'll start with the majority opinion from Gorsuch. His opening line, and quite frankly, this could have been his closing line. Like this could have been the only line. This could have been very pithy, very concise statement or ruling. Government is not free to disregard the First Amendment in times of crisis. Boom, that's it. Government is not free to disregard the First Amendment in times of crisis. That's it. That could have stopped right there. Nothing else need be said. All right, how about this line? So this is the governor put no capacity restrictions on essential businesses, right? But did not deem churches as essential, right? So, well, here's what it says. This is Gorsuch. This is the first paragraph. It turns out the businesses that the governor considers essential include hardware stores, acupuncturists, and liquor stores. Bicycle repair shops, certain signage companies, accountants, lawyers, and insurance agents are all essential too. So at least according to the governor, it may be unsafe to go to church, but it's always fine to pick up another bottle of wine, shop for a new bike, or spend the afternoon exploring your distal points and meridians. Who knew public health would so perfectly align with secular convenience? Oh, that's so good. Oh, I love the Gorsuch crushes Cuomo. Gorsuch obliterates Cuomo with facts. That's so beautiful. I got more. The only explanation for treating religious places differently seems to be a judgment that what happens there just isn't as essential as what happens in secular spaces. Indeed, the governor is remarkably frank about this. In his judgment, laundry and liquor, travel and tools are all essential, while traditional religious exercises are not. That is exactly the kind of discrimination the First Amendment forbids. Gorsuch says Cuomo's not alone with this, right? All across the country. Marijuana dispensaries, casinos, strip clubs have all been, in California, Hollywood, all given exemptions. And he had a great line. He said, in far too many places for far too long, our First Amendment freedom has fallen on deaf ears. So the Supreme Court made the point that you could have a department store in Brooklyn, in the red zone, that could literally have hundreds of people in it. Hundreds of people in it, hundreds of people shopping, coming and going in a given day. But the church right next door, no more than 10. Right next to each other, totally different. And the court says, no, you can't do that. The court says that the restrictions are not narrowly tailored and are far more restrictive than any COVID-related regulations that have previously come before the court, much tighter than those adopted by many other jurisdictions hard hit by the pandemic, and far more severe than has been shown to be required to prevent the spread of the virus. So the court said, listen, there could have been less severe restrictions, right? So there's 26 Catholic churches that were affected by this executive order, 26 Catholic churches that fit over 500 people, 14 Catholic churches that fit over 700, and 2 that fit over 1,000 people. So they get this giant cathedral, fits 1,000 people, and no matter what, no more than 10 people inside. But that's not how it works for any of the other stores, any of the other essential businesses inside the red zone. Isn't that amazing? So department store, maybe they'll say, oh, you can only have 25% capacity, but it's a huge giant store, so 25% capacity is a ton of people. But the church that can fit 1,000 people, no more than 10. And the Supreme Court's like, no, you can't do that. They said that it causes irreparable harm to people. There can be no question that the challenged restrictions, if enforced, will cause irreparable harm. The loss of First Amendment freedoms, even for minimal periods of time, unquestionably constitutes irreparable injury. Even in a pandemic, the Constitution cannot be put away and forgotten. The restrictions at issue here, by effectively barring many from attending religious services, strike at the very heart of the First Amendment's guarantee of religious liberty. Before allowing this to occur, we have a duty to conduct a serious examination of the need for such a drastic measure. This is great. All right, this is my last one. Gorsuch, it is time, past time, to make plain that while the pandemic poses many grave challenges, there is no world in which there's no world in which the Constitution tolerates color-coded executive edicts that reopen liquor stores and bike shops, but shutter churches, synagogues, and mosques. I love it. There's no world in which the Constitution tolerates. Gosh, that's good. So the Constitution still exists in a time of pandemic. 5-4, right, 5-4, but we'll take it. And honestly, forget about what the Supreme Court says anyway, right? Even if they ruled you couldn't meet in your church. In San Diego, they're starting to, where I live, they're starting to crack down on churches meeting inside. I know of 5 churches that are meeting inside, big churches that are meeting inside. And they're like, screw you. Oh, $1,000 fine. A church I'm close with, they say, well, it costs us $8,000 to have our service outside because we have to rent the lights and the stage and all this other stuff. And you're going to fine us $1,000 to meet on Sunday? Boom, it's a steal. Done. No problem at all, right? So Even if the Supreme Court ruled, oh no, you must follow the executive order, who cares? Right? So many Christians have talked a big game for a long time. Brandon Dyer made the point that a generation of Christians grew up reading Radical, Taking Back Your Faith from the American Dream. Generation of Christians grew up reading Crazy Love by Francis Chan and Not a Fan by Kyle Idleman. And as soon as a virus with a 99.99% survival rate comes around, those same Christians are like, well, sleep it in. Feels pretty good. And maybe I'll watch something while I'm on the couch in my pajamas once a month, and that's good enough for me. Come on, Christians. COVID's really separated the wheat from the chaff. You still get to choose which you are, and you know who you are, right? If you're older, if you're like 90 years old and you're worried about the virus, I'm not talking about you. But if you're in your 30s and you're healthy, I understand the appeal of watching church in your pajamas on the couch. But Supreme Court decisions like this, victories like this, are meaningless. The First Amendment is meaningless. The God-given blessing to worship is meaningless. It means nothing if you don't exercise it yourself. So celebrate this Supreme Court victory and go to church. All right, price of gold. It has dropped a lot, which is great news. If you've been on the fence, this is great news. Now listen, I bought a lot when prices were higher, maybe a couple months ago, 2 months ago. I'm worried zero about it. Don't even care. I'm not looking at the day-to-day. For me, it ranges between a year-long play to a lifetime play, right? Something I could pass down to my kids and grandkids. And a lot can happen in that time period, and price of gold will certainly go up. So I'm not worried at all. I wanted to have it in my possession now. I just don't have to worry about it anymore now. But if you've been on the fence, do it now. Prices dropped. Get in now. Because while everyone else is distracted by a great stock market, which is wonderful news, don't get me wrong, people are distracted by that and they're happy about that and they're drunk off that. But we have trillion-dollar bills that we haven't paid for, and it's more to come. We have the Fed printing more money, and it's all about the value of the dollar. That's what the price of gold is really connected to. It's the value of the dollar. And that's the ugly reality there is an ugly reality, what we're facing right now. Right? And you hear all these governments around the world talking about the Great Reset. You think if Biden wins, you think Biden is going to buck the global trend and put America first on this global Great Reset? No way. Put your family first. Patriot Gold Group. 1-800-798-4260. Buy some gold and silver. 1-800-798-4260. Any questions you have, patriotgoldgroup.com. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. In this segment, I want to give the latest update on Trump's legal cases in Pennsylvania. Tomorrow, we're going to spend some time on the voting irregularities, things like the fact that Biden got a massive spike in black voters in Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Detroit only. All right, you got nowhere else. You got massive spikes in votes right where he needed them only. Things like Trump got 11 million more votes this election than 2016, still lost. Obama won re-election with 3.5 million fewer votes. Things like that. But I want to give a legal update here. There's a couple different legal arguments that Trump's team is making in Pennsylvania. It's going to be death by 1,000 cuts. Real quick, the two arguments that he's definitely going to win. There's no question he's going to win these two arguments. The first is the Secretary, you've heard this a million times, the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania said that votes can be received until 3 days after the election. You can't do that. Right? So 100% the Supreme Court's going to rule that you can't do that. The problem is, what's the remedy? We'll get to that in a second. The second thing that Trump's definitely going to win is Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, counties in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, cured ballots. And that violates the 14th Amendment equal protection law, which is what Bush v. Gore in 2000 was all about. It was a 14th Amendment question. So it's the exact same thing. Truly, it's the exact same thing that happened in Pennsylvania, where some counties cured ballots and others didn't, and that means that not all votes were counted equally. So the quick of that is if a mail-in ballot is mailed in and it doesn't have a signature or it's not in its privacy envelope or any other problem, the law says you throw it away. But the Board of Elections or whoever in these different counties said, no, you can call them up. So we'll get a ballot and there's no signature on it. Well, that's okay. Let's just call up the voter and say, hey, you didn't put your signature on. We're going to throw this away, but you can just re-vote. But they only did that in a couple counties. They only did that in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. That's called curing ballots. And you didn't do that in other counties, and that's illegal. So Trump's definitely going to win that case. But again, what's the remedy? Those are rock solid. I promise you the Supreme Court, if it gets there, will rule in favor of Trump on those. No question about that. But what are they going to do? Throw out all those votes? That's a big ask. We'll see. Okay, so here's another argument that Trump's team is making. Act 77. I want to bring this up because Act 77 is important and you're going to be hearing about it over the next 2 weeks. Now you know what it is, or you will in 1 second. Passed in October 2019, and it passed overwhelmingly in the Pennsylvania House and Senate. I don't know what the heck is up with those Republicans who passed Act 77, but it did a couple different things. Minor things like it paid poll workers more money. It also ended straight ticket voting. So in Pennsylvania, you used to be able to just press one button and it would just vote for all the Democrats or all the Republicans. So they got rid of that. But the relevant thing here is it added mail-in voting for everyone. This is from the state website. Pennsylvania has added a new, this is the state government website. Pennsylvania has added a new no excuse needed means for voters to vote by mail. They talk about the difference between mail-in votes and absentee votes. The primary difference is that mail-in voters do not have to provide any reason or excuse for voting by mail. Again, the Republicans in Pennsylvania voted for this. Now, one of the arguments that Trump's team made, they won in the lower court, is that when the state passed this law, they did not follow the proper legislative procedure that is necessary to pass it. Here's what the lower court said. Petitioners argue, that's Trump's team. In order to, actually, Trump's team and someone else on the lawsuit was a guest we talked to last week from Pennsylvania, the representative from, the state rep from Erie. Petitioners argue that in order to amend the Constitution, state constitution, mandatory procedural requirements must be strictly followed. Specifically, pursuant to Article 11, Section 1, a proposed constitutional amendment must be approved by a majority vote of the members of both the Pennsylvania House and Senate in 2 consecutive legislative sessions. Then the proposed amendment must be published for 3 months ahead of the next general election in 2 major newspapers in the country. And finally, it must be submitted to the qualified electors as a ballot question in the next general election and approved by a majority of those voting for the amendment. According to the petitioners, Trump's team, the legislature did not follow the necessary procedures for amending the state constitution before enacting Act 77, which created a new category of mail-in voting. Therefore, the mail-in ballot scheme under Act 77 is unconstitutional on its face and must be struck down. Does it make sense? The argument they're making. They're saying, Trump's team saying, hey, you guys, this law is illegal. It's unconstitutional because you didn't do the proper process. Similar-ish to the Obamacare argument that Republicans made in the Supreme Court. Not to go all into that, but because it was a tax, it had to start in the House of Representatives, as the Constitution says, but it ended up starting in the Senate for some weird procedural reason. So therefore, the law itself needs to be struck down. Whatever. That argument ended up losing in the Supreme Court, as we all know. But it's a procedural argument, that one of Trump's arguments in Pennsylvania. So, assuming that this is all true and that did not go through the proper process, is the breaking of the process, breaking of the legislative process to make the law, is that enough to invalidate all the mail-in ballot votes, all 3 million of them? Again, that's a big ask. But at the same time, why even have an outlined legislative process if you don't have to follow it? If the legislature just do whatever, and then, that's the way it goes. What's the point of even having the steps? The Pennsylvania Constitution says there's 4 ways you can vote absentee. You're on a business trip, you're sick or disabled, there's some religious reason that you can't vote on that day, or if you work for the county and you're working at the polls that day, you could vote beforehand. That's it. And now there's this new thing where you just, like, whatever, you just vote for any reason, mail in. And this was done before COVID. So Trump's team, they just asked the lower court to tell the Secretary of State that they can't certify the results yet, and they got their wish, right? The lower court said, yeah, you guys are right. So Trump won. Then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled and said, nice try. Their argument is your complaint, Trump, is too late. If you were so worried about the procedural irregularities, then you should have complained about it when it was passed, or you should have complained about it in the last primary, not after the election, which you lost, they say. Right? So here's one of the state Supreme Court justices in Pennsylvania. Petitioners, Trump's team, several of whom participated in primary elections under this new system without complaint, play a dangerous game at the expense of every Pennsylvania voter. Petitioners waived their opportunity to challenge Act 77 before the election, choosing instead to, quote, lay by and gamble upon receiving a favorable decision by the electorate. So they wanted to see if they were going to win or not. Unsatisfied with the results of that wager, they would now flip over the table, scattering to the shadows the votes of millions of Pennsylvanians. It's not our role to lend legitimacy to such transparent and untimely efforts to subvert the will of Pennsylvania voters. Courts should not decide elections when the will of the voters is clear. So that's the state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. So their argument is you guys waited too long to complain about how the law was passed, and now you're only really whining about it because you lost. My rebuttal back to that is, yeah, but could you challenge the law in court before the election? Because I feel like the court would say, oh, you haven't been harmed by it yet, so you can't sue because you haven't been harmed. I don't know. But the Supreme Court, as we talked about in the last segment, is now 6-3. So that's another argument. We'll see what the Supreme Court does. Tomorrow, we're going to spend more time on these because no one in the media is talking about any of them. Like, seriously, if you're at anyone in the media, just like lay it out. It's super frustrating. If you just want updates to the legal challenges. I'm not even making like declarative statements necessarily. I'm some here and there, right? But these are just like the facts of like what is happening even. And we're going to bring those to you always. Last point here is people are saying it's too late for all this. It's over. It's too late. Now, there's a reason why the Constitution has electors meeting December 14th, a month and a half after the election. How can you prove that people voted fraudulently until after the election? Like you need a little time, right? This is the process. Don't be discouraged as it plays out. And I know there's a little lull in our attention over Thanksgiving. That's fine. Let's ramp it back up for these potentially the last 2 weeks here. In the meantime, let's protect your home. Home title theft. Man, it's such a low blow when you get it. So the title to your home is under the advanced security protection of your county clerk office, which is no protection, right? Hackers can hack into the most advanced security companies in the world. You don't think they can hack into your county clerk's computers? Of course they can. They do it all the time. So someone hacks in, they take your home title, and they trace your signature, and they forge a quitclaim deed. And then they take out loans against your home until all your equity is gone, and you have no idea this is happening until you start getting collection notices. And by then, they're long gone. You're not protected by your insurance. Your bank's not going to protect you. The county doesn't protect you because they think it's you. And normal identity theft programs don't monitor this. Home Title Lock is your answer. They protect you. They monitor your home title. So if anyone does anything to it, then they alert you, and you can put a stop to it. And then Home Title Lock, on top of that, will spend up to $250,000 in legal fees to help you restore your home title, which now the county thinks you don't have now, right? So Home Title Lock will get you back your home. HomeTitleLock.com. You can register your address, see if you're already a victim, and use the code RADIO. You get 30 days free protection. Code RADIO, HomeTitleLock.com. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I will always highlight people who are brave. And we've talked to a lot of professors who have stood up against a lot of things that are happening on our college campuses, but they all have tenure, right? So, and they say that. They'll say, I can say this. My other colleagues can't. I can. I want to go to Jody Shaw, who's a student support coordinator at Smith College, small liberal arts school in Massachusetts, who is in the midst of standing up against this right now and does not have said protection and therefore deserves even more encouragement. Jody Shaw, how are you?
I'm fine. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
I'm grateful you're here. There's a lot of backstory here, and I encourage everyone to go to your YouTube page and watch all your videos and get all that backstory. But I think the story that's most relevant to most people here is all the employees, or many of the employees at Smith, had a diversity training seminar thing, right? And you chose not to participate in it. What happened there?
Well, I actually... So I simply abstained when I was asked to discuss my race or my understanding of my race in the context of my childhood. That was kind of the wording of the question. And I just said, I'm uncomfortable talking about this at work. And I abstained. And then a little bit later in the workshop, actually it was a professional development retreat, one of the hired facilitators said to the entire group, all my colleagues, any white person who's uncomfortable or displays any kind of discomfort in talking about their race when asked to is not actually uncomfortable. What it is it's called white fragility, and it's a power play. So she essentially framed my discomfort and my, abstinence as an act of aggression. That's how I interpreted it.
Amazing spin. It'd be one thing to say, oh, that white person, Jody Shaw, clearly they were talking about you, is white fragility and she's weak and fragile and whatever, ignoring the reality. But it's another to spin it around and call that an act of aggression that you're putting upon people. That's quite a spin, no?
It is quite a spin, and that is actually that was like the final, I don't know if you'd call it a line in the sand, but that's what compelled me to then file a complaint at the college, because I realized that this is no longer a situation where I can just keep my head down and do my job and just be neutral or abstain from these discussions, which I don't feel are relevant to my position. So when it got to a point where I feel like now they're trying to compel speech and using shame as a tool to do so by calling me out in front of my colleagues, that's when I knew, this is a real problem. This isn't suppression of speech. This is compelling speech.
Yes, and that's a whole next level. I heard you say before that it feels like everyone's acting. It's like a performance art at these seminar things. What do you think you or white people are expected to do and say in these seminars?
Oh, well, there's clearly two scripts. The fact that there's a script for any group of people is troubling, but there's a script for white people, and then there's a script for everyone else, or as the college would define it, people of color. So the script for white people is, I'm white, I have white privilege, I have power in the world, I am an oppressor, or I contribute to racism simply by being white. And then the script for everyone else is, I am marginalized, I'm oppressed, and I am a victim. And the thing about these scripts is that they're incredibly disempowering for both groups of people, because they're essentially telling us that our skin tone is our destiny. And there's really nothing, it's like, an invisible force that's embedded in structures, systems, and people. And I've even heard people of color say, well, I don't feel oppressed, and then being told, well, then you must have internalized racism. So it's not just, it's disempowering for everybody, because there's nothing you can do about it except, I guess, have these very scripted dialogues, which the college seems to think has some benefit or effect on this system.
Yeah, it's a great point. Has anyone ever talked to you about, talked at all about how we get out of this? If they say this, if we all admit this is a big problem or whatever, what's the solution to it beyond just talking about it incessantly?
Yeah, right. I actually did ask that question of the director of equity and inclusion, he mentioned something about doing the work. And so I said, well, what is the work? And I think he said something like, well, that's the $1 million question or something.
Okay.
So, so
nothing.
far, all I've seen is these dialogues and discussions,
Yeah.
and especially the burden put on white people to discuss their privilege and their whiteness, which in a way, if you think about it, kind of sets up this dynamic between white people and people of color that somehow the liberation or the empowerment of people of color depend upon white people to utter a certain prescribed set of phrases and words, which is a kind of, to me, that's, I don't know, that just doesn't sit well with me, that somehow I have that much control over the lives of people of color. Just if I could just say certain things, then somehow it'll be better.
It shouldn't sit well with that other person either, that person of color either. Is there, let me push back a minute, is there a bit of truth in all of this, right? Have you and I benefited from living in a majority white country that hasn't been, we haven't been redlined and whatever, we can go down the list, right? And someone else who's a black student at Smith, right? And so it's always hard to have this conversation when you're like a black student at Smith College, right? And talking about being oppressed. Yeah. But people of color, like, is there truth to all this stuff? And how do we navigate that properly as opposed to this toxic way?
Oh boy, well that's a very complicated question because it's very, very difficult whenever you're talking about truth, to not reduce it or get into kind of this place where you're just talking very reductively and very simplistically and shallowly. So as you just pointed out, being somebody at Smith, you have for example, a white staff member at Smith who the staff are the lowest paid group on campus, and they're actually the majority white population on campus versus students who have no racial majority in the student composition. So to reduce it to this very simplistic script, for lack of a better word, where the white staff member has power over the student who's not white, is just, to me, it's just way too simplistic. And so I do think that privilege comes in a variety of forms. I mean, people who are tall, people who are good looking. I mean, there's so many different things. And I think the college would talk about intersectionality, but even that to me feels very, very reductive. So the answer to your question is yes, I think that white people do have benefits based on their skin color, but you simply cannot reduce that and I think the other part of your question was important, in a majority white environment. I just don't think it can be reduced to that. I think it's very dangerous to reduce it to something so simple as that.
Yeah, such a good point. I don't know what the forces have been in our culture, I don't know if it's social media or just whatever, that have just eliminated all nuance. There's no time or care to any sort of nuance or detailed or even accurate conversation, which is concerning for our future, especially at a college where that's what it's supposed to be all about, right?
Right, yeah. At a college, especially at an elite liberal arts college where that's one of the basic foundations of a liberal arts education is the unfettered exchange of ideas, and nuance is absolutely critical to understanding complex issues. And this is a complex issue. And I feel like it's just been completely flattened and reduced. And it's troubling to me. But from an employment standpoint, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I know we only got about a minute. I hate to do this. I'm sorry, Joe. And I'd love to talk again. Although I did give you twice as much time as Tucker, I should note. Tucker only gave you 4 minutes. We at least gave you double that. But we're gonna have to do it again, just like Tucker. What do we do? What do we do in our employment? What do we do if we have kids that we're going to send to college? This is even infiltrating lower and lower grades, right? What do we do as white people? Gosh, I hate that question, right? I hate that question so much. This paradigm they put us in.
That's what we've been to reduce. Yeah, that's what the position we're in now is we have to talk in terms of skin color.
Hate it.
Yeah. So on a practical level, very, very practical. I think it's important to get things in writing. Like if a school or principal is saying, hey, we're going to do these anti-racism workshops or equity and inclusion initiatives, I think it's important to ask, what does that mean? Because I think part of the problem is we're working with different dictionaries here. So I think it's good to get things in writing. What does that mean exactly? And I think it's also really important for people to find each other, because right now it can feel very isolating and crazy making when you feel like something's not quite right here. This doesn't seem like Martin Luther King, like we're judging people by who they are. It feels something like a lot different. I think it's important to like talk to your neighbors, talk to other parents at the school, and just try to find other people, feel them out. Because I think it's the silent majority, personally, that understands something's not quite right here. So there's two tips.
They're wonderful tips. And it takes people like you to start breaking out first before other people can get the courage to do the same. And I'm grateful for you. I'm going to keep watching your YouTube videos, Jody, and hopefully we can talk again.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks so much for having me.
How can people find those videos? So they just Google your name, or what's the best way?
Yeah, it's Jody Shaw Big Dig. Jody Shaw Smith College Big Dig. It's my videos.
Perfect. Thanks, Jody. We'll do it again. Thank you, ma'am.
Cheers.
Have a great day. Come back and we'll, I like the outro, cheers. I've always liked that. Come back, we'll talk to Professor Vincent Racaniello, latest with COVID vaccine. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to go to our professor, Professor Vincent Racaniello. He's a professor of virology at Columbia University. He's been with us from the very, very beginning, which is amazing. He's the host of the podcast, This Week in Virology, microbe.tv. You must watch and listen to that. Professor, how are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. Post-Thanksgiving, everything's cool.
Indeed. Let's ramp it back up here, because right now it looks like Pfizer, they're sending out, like the vaccines are in the mail, which is pretty amazing. I saw this from someone in Moderna. He said, COVID, here's a quote, this is not a complicated virus. Is that true? Do you believe that?
No. That would only be said by someone who doesn't fully appreciate the complexity of all viruses. They're all amazingly complicated. I mean, just think, they have to get inside your cells and take them over and reprogram them to make more viruses. I don't know what could be more complicated than that.
I guess that's right. Let's talk about the safety of it. What do we know about any side effects that anyone in the trials have had?
So far, the main side effects, and they're not insignificant, include soreness at the injection site, fever, muscle aches. Some people report headaches. Some people report, migraines, which are disabling in many people, general malaise, lethargy, those sort of things. So no deaths, and it's only been, a few months. So those are the usually common side effects you get after getting an injection. A vaccine like this, it's your immune system kicking up and giving you those symptoms. The real question is, are there going to be more serious effects? And that's why we're waiting 2 months after this second boost in these trials to keep observing and make sure, because it's in those 2 months that most of the severe side effects occur. For example, there's a side effect called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which involves a kind of paralysis. And it's been seen after flu vaccination and about 2 months window frame. So that's why they set that time frame at 2 months, just to make sure we don't get that kind of side.
Oh, so in the past with flu vaccines and other vaccines, I'm assuming, it's been 2 months before just Guillain-Barré chimes in, or just other types of side effects too?
Well, Guillain-Barré is the main one that we're concerned about. That takes about 2 months to come up. So that's why they've made this window. Now, they've only looked at tens of thousands of people, and that's the other issue that people are worried about. Some side effects are, 1 in 100,000, even 1 in a million, and you're not going to pick that up until the vaccine has been in people for a while. But those are really rare. And so for people who are worried, I would say if this looks good in 2 months, it's going to be okay. And it would be a risk you have to take, but it's less of a risk to get the vaccine than to get COVID-19, I would say.
Yes, but yeah, everything's a risk-benefit analysis, right? So again, if you're older,
Always.
obviously the risks, everything's a balance. Interesting. Okay, so after 2 months, you would feel very confident, or how confident would you feel about the safety of it after the 2 months?
So these vaccines after 2 months are going to be in almost 100,000 people. If they don't see anything serious, I would take it. I'm 67. I would take these vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna and even the AstraZeneca vaccine. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So do you understand maybe someone's hesitancy? I don't think you have to be an anti-vaxxer in order to be like, oh, wait a second, this is a new thing, and mRNA vaccines are kind of new too. Do you understand someone's maybe initial hesitancy?
I totally understand it. That's why we try and talk to people and explain it to them. And, someone wrote into TWIV yesterday and said, some people actually get hurt by vaccines, and so they get worried. And I said, that's completely acceptable. I understand that. But, it shouldn't cloud your acceptance of all vaccines. If a particular vaccine harms you, it may be just the property of that vaccine. And again, it's a very rare event. But I totally get that. Sure, not everybody who objects is an anti-vaxxer. I totally understand.
I read something that the mRNA is a very temporary thing that's injected into your body, right? So it's not there forever, and it's not going to change your DNA sequencing in dramatic ways. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. Right. It's like a virus infection, or most virus infections. They're temporary, right? Viruses like influenza and common cold viruses and SARS-CoV-2, they come in for a short amount of time and they're gone. Yet your immune response kicks in, and it will remember that to protect you against future infections. But yes, the mRNA vaccine comes in, it lasts probably a couple of weeks, makes an immune response, which will then last, hopefully, many years.
Yep. Okay. I read that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, they did a dosing error. Have you heard the story in their trial? So this doesn't give me a ton of confidence, but they did a one dose and then a one dose, and there was only a 70% success rate. And then they did a dosing error where they gave half a dose and then a full dose, and it turned out to be a 90% success rate. And they averaged those together, and that's where we hear the 70 or 80% or whatever. What's up with that? What's a dosing error?
Yeah, apparently during the manufacturing process, half the dose was put in the vials. That's what we've heard. The company hasn't actually revealed what they're doing. However, it actually turned out to be very informative. The results were better with the first dose in half. And here's what I think is the reason for that. So this is an adenovirus vectored vaccine. They took as we said last time, they take a chimpanzee adenovirus and they put the gene for the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2 in it, and then they inject it in you. It does not reproduce. It just delivers the gene for the spike. Now, when you get that first dose, you're making antibodies against the chimp adenovirus, right? So the second dose, you kick in a memory response against the vector, and it inhibits it from immunizing you. So if you give the first dose half, you're going to get less of a response against the vector. So the second dose will be more effective. That's what I think is going on there. I hope that was clear. Yeah.
Okay, say it one more time. Yeah, say it one more time. I'm almost there.
So this vaccine is in an adenovirus. It's a different virus carrying the spike gene, right? When you get injected with that, you're going to make an antibody response against the vector, against those particles, right? The adenovirus particles. And so if you get a big first dose, you get a big antibody response against the vector, the adenovirus. And then when it's time for the second dose, your antibodies clamp down the adenovirus so it doesn't work so well. That's why they only got, 60%. So giving a half first dose cuts down on the antibody response against the vector, the adenovirus itself. So in retrospect, it may actually be good that they made this mistake, because I understand they're now going to be testing in the U.S. half doses followed by full doses.
Wow, that's amazing. As we look back on that, what an amazing little blip in the story of all this, that a little mistake may happen. Yeah. But that doesn't give a ton of confidence that they made that mistake, right?
I understand. It doesn't give a ton of confidence, and the company's not been terribly transparent. But, in science, often mistakes are how things happen. Penicillin was from a mistake. Right?
Yep. No, that's right. So we should welcome those when they do happen. That's right. Can we, I feel like we have to go over this every once in a while and kind of reevaluate. Because things are changing. I read a New York Times article that the touching surfaces and stuff is not as much of a concern as we initially thought. and maybe a lot of this like cleaning of surfaces is potentially way overboard. And I think the New York Times even called it like safety theater or something like that.
Hygiene theater.
Yeah, there you go. Hygiene theater, yeah. So that's worth readdressing. But one thing I want to readdress here is this idea of a 14-day quarantine, and just even the concept of what the timeline is of when you are actually shedding the virus and potentially infecting other people. What do you know today as that timeline?
Yeah, so the 14-day quarantine is probably going to be changed. The CDC, I heard, is going to announce that they're going to reduce that to 7 to 10 days because what we know about shedding now and transmission suggests that you don't have to wait that long. So, what happens with this virus? You get infected, then there's an incubation period, which is on average 5 days, but it can vary from 2 to 14 days, okay? Incubation period, and then let's say onset of symptoms. The peak shedding and transmission is at or around the onset of transmission. And it's probably just a couple of days when you first start to cough and have sniffles and sore throat and so forth, right? And so we don't need to worry because a couple of days before and after the symptom onset, you're probably no longer transmissible. And that's why we can reduce the quarantine period to less than 14 days.
Okay, so let me say it again. So the day that you start having symptoms, you say it's maybe like that's the highest, and maybe like 2 days after that?
Yeah, I would say 2 to 3 days after, maybe a day before or 2 days before. That's the transmission period, really. And then as you go.
Is the asymptomatic thing still as dramatic as we originally thought, asymptomatic spread?
I believe the data say that. I have looked at quite a few data on asymptomatic spread, and yes, you are still transmitting. And those are difficult, right? Because we don't know where those people are because they don't have any symptoms, they don't get tested and so forth. But all the studies that have been done, yes, asymptomatic spread is still, depending on the study, 20 to 40% of transmission.
Okay, that's still a lot. That's more than I was hoping.
And it goes up as you get younger. The younger you are, the more asymptomatic infections you have.
Okay, so what do we do with that?
We vaccinate people so we don't get sick.
Yeah. My last question for you is about vitamin D. I've seen some more studies about vitamin D and the effectiveness of it. You still encouraged by vitamin D?
Yeah, I think vitamin D is a no-brainer because if you take the right dose, it's not harmful. And it's actually good because in the winter, we always tell people, you live in a sunny place, but here in the Northeast, in the winter, it's dark. And I spend most of my days indoors. And so I started taking vitamin D a few months ago just for that. And it turns out that it's associated with a better outcome in COVID-19. So even though we don't have any randomly controlled trials, and probably we won't have any, I think it's a good idea because it's not harmful and it has other benefits as well.
Do you have a parting thought for us, Professor?
I do have a parting thought, and that has to do with, we talked about vaccines today, right? We did a study, we talked about a study on TWIV last week where they compared mRNA vaccines with protein vaccines. Bottom line is, at least in mice, all caveats apply, the mRNA vaccines make much better immune memory than the protein-based vaccines. Now, if that applies to humans as well, that's a problem because a lot of countries are making pure protein vaccines. Like India is making billions of doses, apparently, of a pure protein SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. It may not work as well as the mRNA vaccines.
Yeah, I'm glad we're doing it, but hopefully we can make enough to spread around the world as well. Is that the conclusion?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, these mRNA vaccines, you can make a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah, and then the future of vaccines is amazing too, with more mRNA vaccines hopefully in the future and other treatments. That's the big thing that I've learned from you over these weeks. Microbe.tv, Professor Vincent Racaniello, appreciate you, sir, as always.
Thank you. See you next time.
See you again next week. Truly, the professor's the man I trust in all of this. So and if you have any questions, please send them to me and I'll send them to the professor next Monday. I just accumulate questions throughout the week and then we address it with him. True story, Mike Slater. Do it again tomorrow. Spread the word.